Once known as the Paris of the Middle East, a place where the world came to marvel at its beauty, culture, and prosperity, today, Lebanon is in ruins. A nation once bursting with life is now on the brink of collapse. Its people are suffering, its streets are burning. Lebanon's economy was thriving. Its GDP was at $55 billion in 2018. But today, the Lebanese lira has lost more than 90% of its value. The GDP has crashed to just $18 billion. Hyperinflation is pushing families into poverty, hospitals are shutting down, and people are dying from preventable diseases. A country that once symbolized hope and beauty is being swallowed by despair. How did this happen? How did Lebanon, with its rich history and vibrant culture, come to the verge of dying? In the 1960s, Lebanon was a thriving hub of culture and commerce in the Arab world. Beirut was a beacon of elegance, known for its lavish nightlife, beautiful architecture, and a burgeoning art scene. The city attracted tourists, intellectuals, and business people from across the globe. During its golden era, Lebanon's GDP soared to around $5 billion in 1975, with a total net worth estimated at approximately $35 billion. The country was known for its flourishing banking sector, which was seen as the Switzerland of the Middle East, and its trade was booming, exporting everything from textiles to agricultural products. Lebanon's strategic location along the Mediterranean made it a pivotal trading hub. The ports of Beirut and Tripoli were filled with goods from Europe, Asia, and Africa, creating a melting pot of culture and commerce that fueled the economy. This vibrant exchange of ideas and goods defined a generation and positioned Lebanon as a leader in the region. But this golden era was not to last. Political tensions and societal divisions began to fracture the fabric of Lebanese society, setting the stage for a devastating civil war that would change everything. As Lebanon basked in the glow of its prosperity, beneath the surface, tensions were simmering. The very diversity that once fueled its growth began to fracture into divisions. By the late 1970s, the nation was struggling with deep-rooted issues that would soon erupt into chaos. Lebanon's population was a tapestry of religions and sects, with significant Christian and Muslim communities coexisting. However, as political power became increasingly tied to religious affiliation, competition for resources and representation created an atmosphere of distrust. The influx of Palestinian refugees in the late 1960s added fuel to the fire as they settled in Lebanon, creating an increasingly complex demographic landscape. Local Lebanese communities began to feel threatened, leading to tensions that would soon boil over. Economic disparities exacerbated the situation, as wealth became concentrated in the hands of a few while the majority faced poverty and unemployment. Corruption began to seep into government institutions, eroding public trust and igniting frustration among the people. In 1975, what started as a small clash between rival factions quickly escalated into a full-blown civil war. The Lebanese Civil War, which raged from 1975 to 1990, was a devastating conflict that ripped apart the very soul of the nation. What had once been a vibrant tapestry of cultures and communities became a battlefield of rival factions, each fighting for power and control. Cities that had stood as symbols of resilience and beauty were reduced to rubble. The once bustling streets of Beirut turned into ghost towns, filled with the haunting echoes of gunfire and despair. Infrastructure crumbled. Schools, hospitals, and homes were destroyed, leaving millions displaced and in dire need. The economy, which had been flourishing, was plunged into turmoil. The banking system, once a pillar of stability, collapsed under the weight of war. Investors fled, capital vanished, and the GDP, which had been around $5 billion in the early 1970s, plummeted. By the end of the conflict, Lebanon's economy would shrink to a fraction of its former self, grappling with debt and inflation. As the fighting continued, the humanitarian crisis deepened. Thousands lost their lives, and countless families were torn apart. The scars of violence led to an increase in trauma, with generations left to cope with the psychological aftermath. Children grew up in war zones, stripped of their innocence, while adults struggled to rebuild their shattered lives. The end of the Civil War brought a fragile peace, but the wounds remained. Lebanon was left to grapple with the consequences of a conflict that had ravaged its people and infrastructure. The once thriving nation now faced a long and arduous road to recovery. The end of the Lebanese Civil War in 1990 marked a turning point, but the road to recovery was fraught with challenges. As the dust settled and the fighting ceased, the hope for a brighter future flickered amidst the ruins. The international community rallied to assist in the reconstruction, and for a brief moment, it seemed that Lebanon could rise from the ashes. Major efforts were made to rebuild the infrastructure that had been decimated. Beirut, once a symbol of destruction, began to transform into a hub of development. Construction cranes dotted the skyline, and ambitious projects were launched to revive the economy and restore national pride. The infamous Solidarity project sought to restore downtown Beirut, turning it into a lively commercial and cultural center. Yet, beneath the surface, deep-seated issues lingered. Political sectarianism, which had fueled the Civil War, persisted in the post-war landscape. The power-sharing agreements established during the the peace process, entrenched divisions rather than healing them, creating a system where political loyalty often outweighed national interest. Corruption became rampant, and economic mismanagement plagued the country. Despite initial signs of recovery, Lebanon's debt skyrocketed, leading to a fiscal crisis that would haunt the nation for years to come. By the early 2000s, the GDP growth that many had hoped for began to falter, and inflation threatened the purchasing power of ordinary Lebanese. As the years passed, the scars of war remained visible. Displaced families struggled to return to their homes, and the memory of loss lingered in every corner. The vibrant culture that had once flourished was overshadowed by a persistent sense of uncertainty and mistrust. Although the post-war era offered glimpses of hope, Lebanon found itself trapped in a cycle of political paralysis and economic instability, setting the stage for the crises that would follow. In the aftermath of the civil war, Hezbollah emerged as a significant player in Lebanon's political landscape, reshaping the dynamics of power within the country. Founded in the early 1980s, Hezbollah was initially created as a response to the Israeli invasion and occupation of southern Lebanon. Over time, it transformed from a militant group into a powerful political entity. With its roots in the Shiite community, Hezbollah capitalized on widespread discontent and the vacuum left by the collapse of state institutions. As many Lebanese felt abandoned by the government, Hezbollah positioned itself as a provider of social services, establishing schools, hospitals, and welfare programs that filled the gaps left by a faltering state. This dual identity, part militant organization, part political party, allowed Hezbollah to gain significant influence. It entered Lebanon's political arena, winning seats in parliament and forming alliances that further entrenched its power. Supporters viewed it as a defender of Lebanese sovereignty, particularly against Israeli aggression, while critics accused it of perpetuating a culture of violence and division. Hezbollah's military prowess and strategic positioning in the region made it a formidable force. The group engaged in several confrontations with Israel, most notably the 2006 war, which resulted in extensive destruction in Lebanon but also solidified its reputation as a resistance movement. The aftermath of the war saw Hezbollah gaining even more support among its base, but the destruction also deepened the divisions within Lebanese society. While Hezbollah claimed to advocate for the marginalized Shiite population, its growing power also contributed to political paralysis and sectarian tensions. The organization became synonymous with Iran's influence in the region, which further complicated Lebanon's relationships with Western nations and its Arab neighbors. Today, Hezbollah's role in Lebanon is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it continues to provide essential services and a sense of security for many. On the other, its presence exacerbates political fragmentation and perpetuates the cycle of instability that has plagued Lebanon for decades. Since the onset of the Syrian civil war in 2011, Lebanon has witnessed a massive influx of refugees, with over 1.5 million Syrians currently residing in the country. This number represents a significant portion of Lebanon's population of around 6 million, making it one of the countries with the highest per capita concentrations of refugees globally. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, registered around 900,000 Syrian refugees by 2019, but estimates suggest the actual number is much higher due to unregistered refugees. Many refugees live in informal settlements, contributing to the difficulties in monitoring and providing aid. The sudden arrival of millions of refugees has placed immense pressure on Lebanon's already fragile economy. Basic services like healthcare, education, and housing have become increasingly strained, leading to competition for limited resources. Many Lebanese citizens compete with refugees for jobs, especially in low-skilled sectors. The influx of refugees often leads to lower wages and job insecurity for both communities. Moreover, many refugees work in the informal economy, which contributes to tax losses and exacerbates competition for low-wage jobs. Lebanon's healthcare system has been overwhelmed by the increased demand for services from both local populations and refugees. Hospitals and clinics are often overcrowded, and many refugees cannot afford healthcare costs, leading to untreated health issues. On August 4, 2020, the city of Beirut was shaken by one of the most devastating explosions in history. What was meant to be a quiet summer day turned into a scene of chaos and destruction, forever altering the lives of countless Lebanese. At around 6:07 p.m., a massive explosion rocked the port area of Beirut, sending shockwaves throughout the city and beyond. The explosion was caused by the detonation of approximately 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly explosive chemical that had been improperly stored in a warehouse for years. The force of the blast was equivalent to a small earthquake, leveling buildings, shattering windows, and leaving a 140-foot crater at the site. The immediate aftermath was catastrophic. Over 200 people lost their lives and thousands were injured. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, with families displaced and lives shattered. The explosion created a humanitarian crisis, as hospitals that were already struggling due to the COVID-19 pandemic found themselves overwhelmed with casualties. casualties. As the dust settled, anger and frustration began to boil over. The Lebanese people demanded accountability, seeking answers from a government they felt had long since abandoned them. Protests erupted in the streets, with citizens calling for justice and an end to the rampant corruption that had allowed such a tragedy to occur. The explosion laid bare the systemic failures of the Lebanese state. Investigations into the incident revealed a history of negligence and incompetence among officials, further eroding trust in the government. The aftermath of the explosion intensified calls for political reform, yet the entrenched political elite remained resistant to change. International aid poured in, but the road to recovery was steep. Many viewed the explosion not just as a tragedy, but as a catalyst for a potential revolution. As the Lebanese grappled with the physical and emotional scars left by the disaster, they were also faced with the opportunity to reshape their nation, a chance to rise from the ashes once again. As Lebanon navigates the aftermath of the Beirut explosion and the lingering effects of the civil war, it finds itself entrenched in one of the worst economic crises in its history. The country is facing a perfect storm of hyperinflation, currency devaluation, and widespread poverty, leading to an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. Lebanon's economy has crumbled, with the Lebanese lira losing over 90% of its value since 2019. What once exchanged at a rate of 1,500 lira to the dollar now hovers around 60,000 lira, rendering many salaries nearly worthless. Families that once enjoyed a comfortable standard of living now struggle to afford basic necessities such as food, medicine, and fuel. Inflation has skyrocketed, with food prices increasing by over 600% in recent years. Many Lebanese now rely on food banks and aid from non-governmental organizations just to survive. The United Nations has warned that more than 80% of the population is living below the poverty line, while unemployment rates soar, particularly among the youth. The banking sector remains paralyzed, with depositors unable to access their savings. Trust in financial institutions has evaporated, and businesses have been forced to close their doors. The government's inability to implement necessary reforms and combat corruption has led to international aid being withheld, leaving Lebanon in a precarious position. Social unrest has become commonplace as protests erupt across the nation. The cries for accountability and change grow louder, yet the political elite seems paralyzed by infighting and a lack of willingness to address the root causes of the crisis. As citizens demand a better future, many feel hopeless, trapped in a system that seems determined to repeat its failures. Despite the overwhelming challenges, there is a flicker of resilience among the Lebanese people. Grassroots movements are emerging, and a younger generation is advocating for change, pushing back against the status quo. In the face of despair, they hold on to the hope that Lebanon can rise again, transforming its pain into a platform for a brighter future. If you found this video informative and impactful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful content on current events and global issues.